Two. Yes, we ready? Hello and welcome to the Say What vlog. Here we are at the Poetry Cafe in Covent Garden, and today I am joined by the novelist David Churchill, or the artist formerly known as David Thomas, and today we're going to be discussing his latest book, which is called Devil, and it's the first part of a trilogy of novels he's writing about William the Conqueror, the Leopards of Normandy, this trilogy is called. And it's the first series of books he's published under his new name, David Churchill, and I think, is this your 17th book?
Something like that. 3 names actually, because there's Tom Kane as well.
There's Tom Kane as well.
Yeah.
And it says here you've been translated into 20 languages.
Yeah.
Okay, that's quite impressive. Well, first of all, so you're best known for your Carver novels, published under the name Tom Kane, of course.
Yep.
And then there's obviously Ostland and a couple of other novels published as David Thomas.
Correct.
So David Churchill has emerged.
Yes.
In what capacity?
David Churchill has emerged because it's a publishing issue. Basically, the more that books are sold in supermarkets, which is now the prime area for selling actual physical books, I mean, as opposed to doing it online, the more they want to rack you in the same place. So you should be, as much as possible, in the publisher's and the marketer's mind, a brand. And that brand should be as reliable as Heinz baked beans. You go to buy a can of Heinz baked beans, you get baked beans and tomato sauce. Okay. Similarly, you go to buy a Lee Child book, you get Jack Reacher. You don't suddenly get a romantic comedy, you don't suddenly get a historical novel, you get a novel about a big bloke who bashes people in the head. It's a Jack Reacher book, you buy it, you're happy, everybody's happy, it's always in the same place. My problem is that I like writing different kinds of books. To me, this is not an odd thing. I mean, Steven Spielberg makes different kinds of films. My all-time great icon, David Bowie, has made a career out of making different kinds of albums. Neil Young has done the same thing. Bruce Springsteen has done the same thing. However, in genre fiction, this is very, very problematic. So the way people get around it is they give you a different brand for each type of thing you do. And the way I rationalize it in my own head is a bit like a fashion designer who has, I mean, Karl Lagerfeld used to have the Karl Lagerfeld line, he worked for Chanel, I think there were other companies he worked for at the same time. So he had different lines. And this is how I try and think about it. It's the same writing, it's the same me, but it's 3 different lines. And the David Churchill line is a historical fiction line, Tom Kane is books about a guy called Sam Carver, and David Thomas writes faintly more literary, moody, depressing, serious thrillers.
I see, okay.
So that's basically how it goes. I mean, it's weird, and I have to literally practice new signatures. It's like a bride, you know, getting her new name. Yeah, and I sat down to do 100 copies of Devil in a bookshop in Covent Garden, and I realised I didn't have a signature. So I had to sort of scribble a few times until one came out, but it started going haywire. Somewhere around the sort of 50th or 60th book I couldn't do it anymore. So I had to stop, collect my thoughts, start again.
Okay, so you have touched on this already, but obviously you've written novels set in the present day, you wrote a historical novel about the Second World War.
Correct.
What made you decide to go right the way back to the dawn of the Middle Ages for this trilogy?
Well, this was actually an idea that I had before the Carver books, or before Ostland, which is the Second World War book. And it's like all my books. All my books come from a moment where I hear something, or I see something, or I read something, or I just think something, and I go, oh, that's a book. And with this, I was watching Simon Schama's History of Britain, and he had this brilliant Schama-esque evocation of William the Conqueror's body lying in an abbey outside Rouen, a priory outside Rouen, naked and bloated, having been stripped of all the valuables and his clothes and everything by everybody around him. And here was this conqueror brought low, and I just thought, an amazing image. I don't know that about William the Conqueror. And then I realised I knew almost nothing about William the Conqueror except, you know, he conquered. He came here, 1066, Battle of Hastings, a bit later the Domesday Book, was vicious up in Yorkshire. Apart from that, I know nothing. And indeed, nor does anybody else. In fact, these days, they probably don't even know 1066. But the thing about William the Conqueror is, literally all around the world, he's one of those names like Genghis Khan or Napoleon that is more or less universal. In Spanish, it's Guillermo el Conquistador, which is one of my favorites.
That sounds quite good.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah, I like that. He's Guillaume Le Conqueror in French. I'm not quite sure what he's in German, but anyway, he's something. Okay. And the more I got into his story, finding out about his life, the more I realised that conquering England was one of the less interesting things about him, and that his early life in particular is just this fantastic, gripping, you know, Games of Thronesy, I hate to say, type of epic. It's amazing.
Okay, so you mentioned when he's laid out in his death, and I read actually it's in Peter Ackroyd's New History. Apparently, he exploded. Did he explode?
Yeah,
his guts explode.
Well,
create a terrible.
Almost everything. Here's one of the other great things from a novelist's point of view about the period William Conqueror's in. It's before really reliable historical records. In fact, the Domesday Book is really the first reliable, you know, completely reliable, factual account of something since Roman times. Everything else is chronicles, and the chronicles are written by monks who probably didn't know the people involved. If they did know the people involved, they were beholden to them. So it's just a series of amazing stories. And one of the amazing stories is, yes, that his body, all the gases inside his stomach, kind of expanded. And he had to be kind of stuffed into his coffin. And as he was being stuffed into his coffin, he more or less exploded. Whether this tale is true or apocryphal, I don't know. But it is absolutely typical of the stuff you find in chronicles, which is amazing material. I mean, these people were wild. I mean, as one of the things about William is, he was the descendant of Vikings. Normandy is so called because it was where the Norsemen settled. His great-great-great-grandfather, if I get that right, was the founder of his dynasty and was a Viking and a conqueror who was basically given Normandy by the French to pay him off. And they had a Viking attitude. You know, there's a kind of a devil take the hindmost sort of approach that the Normans had, which I think comes from that sort of, as I say, Viking way of thinking.
Okay, yeah. So
applies to the women too.
Yes, because I was going to ask about that. Was it Rollo the Strider?
Rollo the Strider,
who founded the dynasty.
Yes, again, there's a classic case. Now, nobody knows precisely who Rollo the Strider was. He was called Rollo or Hrolf or Roland or something like that, or Rodolph. And he might have been a Dane, and he might have been Icelandic, and he might have been Norwegian. One of the possible things people he could have been, is this guy called Ganger Rolf, which means Walker Rolf. Okay. That's literally speaking, but I thought Rollo the Strider was better. He's known as Rollo, Duke Rollo.
Okay. So it's a very violent world that you describe in this book. There's a lot of violence, there's a lot of sex, but there's often sex in fiction. And the violence is pretty extreme, but it was a dog-eat-dog world.
Totally. When I first had the idea for this book, and I called up my agent, I said, it's the Godfather in armour. It's all about dynastic struggles between families, many of which are completely interrelated, in which you basically stay in power as long as you have the physical might to do so, and as long as you are ruthless enough in getting rid of everybody else. So it's, you know, it's tough stuff, yeah.
Okay. Yes, because it seems there's a lot of kings in this book and a lot of thrones, but none of the kings seem to be sleeping easily at night.
No.
So was kingship just a case of might is right, or was there more to kingship at the time?
No, that was pretty much it. I mean,
okay.
Certainly if you look at the English kings, okay, so William's great-aunt Emma marries Ethelred, known as the Unready, although that's not actually an accurate translation, but never mind. Yes, it is, but the ill-advised is what it literally means, but we know him as Ethelred the Unready. He got kicked off the throne by a Dane called Svein, no rhyme intended, whose son Canute then became the King of England. Canute the Great, ruler of England, Denmark, Sweden, bits of Norway, Sweden, bits of Scotland. I mean, had an empire, far from being the rather ridiculous figure. He's Canute sitting there, you know, with the waves. Yeah. He was actually an incredibly powerful, sexy guy who came along. His father and he wrested the throne from Ethelred and his son. He got Emma, the wife, as well, who was a Norman, and the Normans were basically using her as currency to stay in with whoever was King of England. Canute then had a variety of sons by different women, who then fought as to whose son was going to become King of England. In the end, none of them did, because it all went to the sons of Godwin, who was this incredibly powerful earl who thrived under both Ethelred and Canute, and his son was Harold, who became king, who then got kicked off the throne by William. I mean, it's all about who can stay in power, who can enforce their power, or who can take the power from somebody else, and it's most of the time at the point of a blade. The women are used as these dynastic chess pieces who link or don't link various families together. But in the case of, say, Emma or her mother, Gunnar, they are incredibly powerful, interesting, intelligent, well-read, manipulative, strong-willed women. And there's actually a French woman, Queen Constance, who, I think there's a book in her actually. She was bad to the bone. Okay, is she coming in a... She appears in Devil briefly, and there's a great line. It's a friend of mine wrote to me and said, you've written this great line about a woman who's so untrustworthy, the only time I believe her is when she's threatening violence. And that line is used in a letter. That is an actual line that an actual bishop of Chartres wrote to his equivalent in Rouen, in Normandy. So it was actually a 10th century line. The guy had actually written, I only believe this woman when she's threatening violence. So that tells you the kind of world that they were living in. Yeah, absolutely. And am I right in thinking that all the characters are historical, aside from Jarl, the Viper? The Viper is of the poisoner. Yes. Yes. The Normans are obsessed by poison. The Normans are obsessed. When I was doing the Tom Kane books, the first of which concerns the death of an unnamed princess in a subway in Paris, go figure. Yeah. I spoke to a Russian who had been a colonel in military intelligence in Russia. And I said to him, do you think Princess Diana was murdered, just out of curiosity? And he laughed. Because if you're Russian, of course she was murdered. Yeah. Everybody's murdered. The Normans were a bit like that. They figured if you died young, no, it wasn't illness. It wasn't any, there were about 1 million ways you could die young in the 11th century because, medicine was as primitive as it has been in the last 3,000 years. Yeah. But they figured if you died young, it was because somebody killed you. And the principal reason they gave for people dying young, for reasons otherwise unexplained, was poison. It therefore struck me that what this story needed was a poisoner, since there were so many people the Normans figured had been poisoned. And so, yes, I created a poisoner. And there are a few other purely fictional characters who I just used really for minor characters. Yeah. But 99% of the people in the book are real, yeah. Okay, so aside from William the Conqueror, who was the other character? You mentioned a few already, but who's the other character? Because there's a lot of characters in this book. Yeah. It must have been quite tough managing. This book is really, yeah. So the question, who is the protagonist of this book? Because the Devil is the story of William's birth and boyhood, very early boyhood. So he's kind of too young to be an active part. He's just a child. He is, what, 7 or 8 when the book ends? Yes. Okay. Maybe a bit, no, maybe a bit older. But I mean, the key protagonist is his father Robert, and his mother Helena. And they have, again, this amazing story. Robert is, as the book begins, the younger son of a dying Duke of Normandy, and then the younger brother of the man who takes, as it were, the throne of Normandy. And he is a young, arrogant, cocky, about 18 or 19, because nobody knows the dates of anybody's birth, including William, I mean, in real life. So I'm figuring he's a teenager. And the legend goes that he meets this incredibly beautiful girl, Helena, who's the daughter of a tanner. And tanners made leather, and in order for that to happen, they had to use feces and urine as part of the process, and was therefore a very, very filthy trade, and they were regarded quite low on the pecking order because they lived surrounded by shit, basically, and large vats of animal and human urine. So They didn't make a lot of friends. But one of them had this incredibly beautiful daughter. And Robert sees her one day, so the story goes, and beds her. And she produces William. He was known to his contemporaries as William the Bastard. Not because he was a thoroughgoing bastard, though he probably was a thoroughgoing bastard, but because he actually was literally a bastard in the sense of being illegitimate.
Okay, and so just to finish, can you give us a little flavour of what to expect from the next instalment? Roughly, what kind of direction?
The next instalment is very simple. William, as a boy, was orphaned. In fact, his father died when he was still very young. And he was therefore, and he was the heir to the dukedom. And control of William was control of Normandy. So essentially this incredible kind of power struggle goes on among an older generation to William to see who can basically be the person who manipulates this kid. And then his contemporaries grow up, and he grows up into his teens and their teens, and they don't think like that. They just think, we're going to kill William.
Okay.
So by the time he is sort of 17, 18, 19, he is fighting for his life. And again, to take a sort of Godfather-esque analogy, if anybody knows The Godfather knows that at the end of the first film and the first book, Michael Corleone, who has sort of been regarded as the wimp in the family, basically wipes out all the competition. You know, there's that incredible scene where all the killings are done more or less simultaneously. It wasn't like that, obviously, in William's case, but the principle was the same. That he, you know, having been this illegitimate kid, you know, who was kind of his claim to the throne was quite suspect because there were other people who figured they had better claims, has had to be a sort of pawn of other people's manipulation for a long, long time. And then he gets to 18 or 19 and he just says, right, now I'm coming into town, I'm going to rule this place, and you'd better get with the program or get out, because otherwise I'm just going to kill you. And that's essentially, the second book takes you from this little boy to this grown man who is a seriously dangerous proposition.
Cool. Well, I read the book over this weekend in 2 sittings. I really enjoyed it. It's a real riot, and I highly recommend it. The first of the Leopards of Normandy trilogy, Devil. David?
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.